The orchestra was playing a soft melody in the garden, the sound mingling with the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of expensive chatter. My mother stood in the centre of it all, radiant in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. It was her 60th birthday party, a grand affair held in the sprawling house I was told I would never be worthy of. My brother, David, the golden child, raised his glass for a toast. "To the most wonderful mother in the world," he declared, his voice smooth and confident. "May your life always be as beautiful as this home you've built for us." Everyone cheered. My mother dabbed a tear from her eye, a perfect little performance of maternal pride. I waited until the applause died down before I moved from the shadows at the edge of the lawn. A path cleared for me as I walked toward her, the guests parting like the Red Sea, their whispers following me like a cold draft. I didn't smile, I simply held out a crisp white envelope. My mother took it, her expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "What is this, Alex?" she asked, her voice a little too loud. "If it's one of your sob stories, this isn't the time." I just stared at her, my face a mask of calm. "It's my birthday gift to you," I said softly. She tore it open impatiently. Her eyes scanned the document inside, her perfect smile faltering, then collapsing entirely. The colour drained from her face as she read the legal letterhead, the bolded words clear even from a distance. "Notice of eviction." She looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't understand how the house she was celebrating in was no longer hers. She didn't realise that every single brick, every window pane, every blade of grass she was standing on now belonged to me. You might be wondering why I chose my mother's birthday to serve her an eviction notice. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, to a cold train station and a little boy holding a letter that sealed my fate. It all started when I was 12 years old. My world was small and revolved around one simple rule: take care of my brother, David. He was 2 years younger, but in my parents' eyes, he was the sun, and I was just a planet caught in his orbit. While I was expected to get perfect grades, do the chores, and essentially act as a third parent, David's only job was to be charming. If I got an A, my parents would ask why it wasn't an A+. If David managed to tie his own shoes, he was hailed as a genius. I learned early on that their love was not a right, but a reward, and it was a reward I could never seem to earn. David, however, was born swimming in it. One grey morning, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. They were dressed for travel, their suitcases standing by the door. This wasn't unusual. Their business trips were frequent and always shrouded in mystery. "Alex," my father said, his voice serious, "we have to go away for a while. We need you to be the big kid now. We need you to be strong for the family." My mother nodded, her hand resting on David's shoulder, who was busy trying to stack sugar cubes into a tower. "We've hit a rough patch," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Just a small one, but we need your help to get through it." I remember my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and pride. They needed me. This was my chance to finally prove my worth. My mother then explained the plan. They were sending David to live with our wealthy aunt for a few months. "It's a better environment for him right now," she explained, "more stable." What she didn't say was that they couldn't afford to feed both of us. My task was simple: take David to the central train station and put him on the 3 p.m. train. He would be met at the other end. Then they handed me an envelope. It was thick and sealed with wax. "This is the most important part," my father said, pressing it into my hand. "A man will meet you at the station. He'll be waiting by the big clock. You give this to him and only him, understand? Everything depends on it." I nodded, my mind racing. What was in the letter? Why was it so important? I didn't know then that the little boy I was about to meet wasn't my brother. The little boy wasn't David. My real brother had been quietly sent to our aunt's a week prior. A trip I was told was just a short pre-visit. The boy whose hand I held on the bus ride to the city was a stranger. His name was Leo, and he was 8 years old. He had been staying in our guest room for 3 days, and my parents had told me he was the son of a business associate who had fallen on hard times. My job was to be his friend, to keep him company before he was reunited with his family. I didn't question it. I was 12. My parents' words were the law, their explanations the absolute truth. Leo was small for his age, with big, sad eyes that never seemed to blink. He barely spoke, just followed me around the house like a shadow, clutching a worn teddy bear. When we arrived at the grand, echoing hall of the central station, the noise and chaos seemed to swallow us whole. The screech of train brakes, the unintelligible announcements over the loudspeaker, the swarm of people rushing past, it was terrifying. Leo's hand tightened in mine, and I saw his lower lip begin to tremble. He started crying, not loudly, but with silent, shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. I saw people glance at us, a few with pity, most with indifference. I just stood there, frozen, thinking he was abandoned, or at least felt like he was. My heart ached for him, but my father's words echoed in my head. Everything depends on it. I spotted the big clock tower in the center of the concourse and saw a man standing beneath it, just as promised. He was tall and wore a plain grey coat, his face impassive. I pulled Leo along, my own fear a knot in my stomach. "Are you the man? For the letter?" I stammered. He simply nodded, his eyes flicking from me to the crying child beside me. I shakily pulled the thick envelope from my jacket and handed it over. He didn't open it. He just tucked it into his coat pocket and then reached down, his hand closing around Leo's small arm. He started to lead him away. I had done my job. I felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by a pang of guilt as Leo looked back at me, his face streaked with tears. But then he did something I didn't expect. He twisted away from the man, ran the few steps back to me, and shoved a small folded piece of paper into my hand. It was crinkled and warm from his pocket. "Read it," he whispered, the first words I'd heard him speak all day. The man grabbed him again, more firmly this time, and pulled him into the crowd. In seconds, they were gone. I was left standing alone under the clock, holding a letter that would unravel my entire world. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, the noise of the station fading into a dull roar. The small crinkled piece of paper in my hand felt heavier than a brick. My first instinct was to throw it away, to pretend it never happened, to go home and wait for my parents to return and tell me I had done a good job. But Leo's whispered, "Read it," echoed in my ears. I walked over to a deserted bench against the far wall, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and sat down. My hands were trembling so much I could barely unfold the paper. It was lined school paper, and the words were written in the messy, oversized print of a young child. It wasn't a long letter. It said, "My name is Leo. My mommy loves me. Your parents told her they would take me to a special school. They lied. The letter you gave the man is for my new daddy. Your parents sold me to him. They did it for money. I am scared. Please don't forget me. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes, but they refused to change. Sold me. For money." The simple, childish sentences painted a picture so monstrous my mind could barely comprehend it. The rough patch my parents were in, the mysterious business trips, the sudden need for me to be strong for the family. It wasn't about saving our family. It was about funding it through the sale of a human child. My parents hadn't just deceived me, they had made me their accomplice. I was the delivery boy in a human trafficking scheme. The trust I had placed in them, the desperate yearning for their approval, all of it curdled into a cold, sick horror. They hadn't just sent David away for his own good, they had sent him away to make room for their merchandise. I sat on that bench until the station grew dark and the crowds thinned to a few lonely travellers. The boy who had arrived that afternoon, worried about a test at school and eager to please his parents, was gone forever. In his place was someone else, someone who understood the profound and terrifying capacity for evil that can hide behind a familiar smile. I carefully folded the letter and put it deep inside my pocket. It was a secret, a poison, but it was also proof. And as I finally stood up to walk home to an empty house, a cold, hard thought formed in the ruins of my childhood. One day, I would make them pay. I didn't know how, but I knew it was the only thing that mattered anymore. When my parents returned 2 weeks later, it was like a scene from a movie. They were tanned, smiling, and laden with gifts. They brought David back from our aunts, and the house was suddenly filled with laughter and excitement. They handed me an expensive-looking watch, ruffling my hair and telling me how proud they were of me for being so responsible. "You were our little soldier," my father said, clapping me on the back. I felt bile rise in my throat. I looked at the watch on my wrist, a blood money trinket, and felt nothing but ice in my veins. From that day on, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was the quiet, sullen son. On the inside, I was a collector of evidence, a keeper of a terrible truth. The years that followed were a masterclass in injustice. The money from Leo's sale washed away all their troubles. They paid off their debts, renovated the house, and poured every remaining cent into my brother David. He got the best clothes, the newest gadgets, the most expensive tutors. When he wanted to learn guitar, a vintage Fender appeared in his room. When I needed a new computer for my advanced programming classes, I was told to get a job and learn the value of $1. Every A+ I earned was met with a distracted nod, while every C David scraped by with was celebrated as a heroic effort. They saw my quiet focus as a flaw, a lack of social grace. They saw David's effortless charm as a sign of his inherent superiority. They had no idea my silence was a shield, and my focus was a weapon being sharpened. I hid Leo's letter in a hollowed-out book in my closet. Sometimes, late at night, I would take it out and read it. It was my anchor, my reminder. It kept the rage from boiling over into a premature, useless confrontation. I knew a shouting match would accomplish nothing. They would deny it, call me a liar, and paint me as the ungrateful, delusional child. No, my revenge had to be cold, calculated, and absolute. It required power, and power required patience. So I studied. I poured all my energy into my schoolwork, excelling in mathematics and economics. When it came time for college applications, they barely paid attention, too busy planning David's lavish high school graduation party. I didn't care. I secured a full scholarship to a prestigious university hundreds of miles away, majoring in finance and corporate law. As I packed my bags, my mother told me, "Maybe some time away will improve your attitude." I just smiled. She thought she was getting rid of a problem. In reality, she was finally letting me off my leash. College was not a place of discovery for me, it was a forge. While other students were joining clubs and going to parties, I was in the library, devouring books on securities law, forensic accounting, and debt restructuring. I treated my education not as a path to a career, but as an apprenticeship in warfare. I learned how fortunes were built, but more importantly, how they were dismantled. I learned that money was a language, and that my parents, despite their sudden windfall, were barely literate. They knew how to spend, but they had no idea how to protect what they had. I took internships at cutthroat firms, not for the resume, but to observe the predators in their natural habitat. I learned to be ruthless, to see every asset as a target and every liability as a weapon. All the while, I maintained a cool, distant relationship with my family. The occasional phone calls were always the same. "Alex, you're so quiet. Are you making any friends?" my mother would ask, her voice laced with pity. Then, the conversation would inevitably shift to David. David had decided college wasn't for him. David was starting a band. David needed a few $1,000s for equipment. David was going to be a star. I would listen, make non-committal sounds, and hang up. They pictured me as a lonely bookworm, struggling to get by, a grey figure on the periphery of their vibrant lives. They had no idea I was living on less than a third of my scholarship money, investing the rest with a discipline that bordered on religious fervour. Every dollar they wasted on David's whims, I saved and multiplied. The day I graduated with highest honours, they didn't attend the ceremony. They were in Cancun, a trip to celebrate David's 21st birthday. I didn't mind. I sold the graduation gift they'd mailed me, another expensive, impersonal watch, and used the money as seed capital. I didn't apply for jobs at big banks. I didn't want a boss. I wanted to be the one pulling the strings. I opened a small, independent consultancy firm specializing in high-risk asset management. It was a fancy name for a one-man operation run out of a tiny apartment. My first client was myself. My first project was a deep forensic dive into the finances of two people, my parents. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The money from Leo's sale hadn't been invested. It had been used to secure a series of increasingly reckless loans, all leveraged against their one major asset, the family home. They weren't living on wealth, they were living on a mountain of debt, and I had just discovered the path to the summit. For the next 2 years, I worked with a singular, all-consuming focus. Through my firm, a neutral and anonymous entity called Apex Holdings, I began to hunt. My parents, in their financial illiteracy, had spread their borrowing across half a dozen small regional banks and private lenders. They thought this diversified their risk. In reality, it made them vulnerable. I started with the smallest loan, a high-interest note from a credit union. I approached them with an offer to buy the debt portfolio it was part of. To them, I was just another investor cleaning up distressed assets. The deal was done in a week. I now owned the first link in their chain. One by one, I collected the pieces. I moved methodically, never showing my hand, always operating through lawyers and shell corporations. Each signed contract felt like a small victory, a quiet reclamation of justice. I learned the intimate details of their profligacy. The loan for the luxury SUV for David, the line of credit for European vacations, the second mortgage to finance one of David's catastrophic startup ideas. They were bleeding money, and all the while, I was patiently positioning myself to catch every drop. Within 18 months, I had done it. I was the sole proprietor of every single dollar of their debt. They owed everything, their house, their cars, their entire lifestyle, to a company whose owner they believed was a disappointment. The final trigger, as I knew it would be, was David. He came to them with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to invest in a friend's cryptocurrency scheme. He needed a significant sum of money, and he needed it now. I know this because my father, in a rare phone call, awkwardly tried to ask me for a loan. I politely declined, citing my own modest financial situation. Desperate not to disappoint their golden boy, they did exactly what I predicted. They missed a major payment on one of the loans, a payment that was now due to me. That single default triggered a cross-collateralization clause I knew they'd never read. All their debts were now due, in full, immediately. I didn't foreclose. That would be too messy, too public. Instead, I sent a lawyer with a simple offer: sign over the deed to the house to settle the full debt, or face immediate crushing legal action and public bankruptcy. Terrified and cornered, they signed. Just like that, the house was mine, and I knew the perfect occasion to tell them, my mother's grand 60th birthday party. We now return to the moment the music stopped in the garden. My mother stood clutching the eviction notice as if it were a venomous snake. My father was the first to find his voice. "Alex, what is the meaning of this? Is this some kind of sick, twisted joke?" he boomed, striding toward me. His face was red with anger, the perfect host's mask shattered. David was right behind him, his expression a mixture of confusion and contempt. "You're pathetic," he spat. "You were always a jealous freak, but this? You've finally lost your mind." The guests were silent, a captive audience to a drama far more compelling than polite conversation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I met my father's gaze and spoke in a calm, level tone. It's not a joke, it's a business transaction. Over the past several years, you've used this house as collateral to secure numerous loans you couldn't afford. You defaulted. I, through my company, acquired that debt. When you were given the option to settle the debt by signing over the property, you took it. The paperwork is all legally binding. I gestured vaguely toward the house. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. It's all there in the letter. Your company, my mother whispered, the words catching in her throat. You did this to us. This is about money, isn't it? My father yelled, his voice cracking. After everything we gave you, you do this for money. The accusation hung in the air, thick with hypocrisy. This was my moment. The reason I had orchestrated this public humiliation. I let my eyes drift from my father to my mother, to my brother. I let the silence stretch for a beat, drawing every eye in the garden toward me. Then I spoke, my voice soft but carrying in the sudden stillness. No, I said, this was never about money. This is about a little boy named Leo. The name landed like a physical blow. I watched as 20 years of buried guilt erupted onto their faces. My father staggered back as if I had struck him. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Even David, who knew nothing, looked back and forth between his parents' horrified expressions and my cold stare, a dawning understanding flickering in his eyes. They were speechless. Their secret, the source of all their comfort and my entire life's pain, was finally out in the open, exposed before the very people they'd spent years trying to impress. I didn't need to say another word. I had won. I gave a slight, formal nod. 30 days, I repeated. Then I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving them standing alone in the wreckage of their perfect life. I didn't stick around to watch the party guests flee. I simply got in my car and drove away, the image of my parents' shattered faces my only souvenir. In the days that followed, my phone became a battlefield. First came the voicemails from my mother, a torrent of tears and desperate pleas. Alex, please, we can talk about this. You can't do this to your family. We love you. Her definition of love had always been conditional, and it seemed the condition now was that I return her house. I deleted each message without listening to the end. Then came the texts from my father, oscillating between threats of lawsuits he couldn't afford and commands disguised as fatherly advice. You are making a terrible mistake, son. You need to undo this now. His authority, once absolute in my world, was now just pathetic noise. David's messages were the most predictable. They were a stream of pure, unfiltered rage, riddled with typos and insults. He called me every name he could think of, accusing me of ruining his life. He didn't seem to grasp that the life he was living was funded by a crime. He only understood that his comfort was threatened. I read each of his texts with a clinical detachment and then blocked his number. My silence was a wall they could not breach. For the first time in my life, I was unreachable, and they were the ones left screaming into the void. It was a reversal so total it was almost poetic. After 2 weeks of this, a thick envelope arrived at my office sent by courier. It was a handwritten letter from my mother. It seemed she had finally realized that tears and threats were useless. This was her final, desperate gamble. In page after page of looping cursive, she confessed everything. She told the whole sordid story of Leo, how they had met his impoverished single mother, how they had concocted the lie about a special school for gifted children, how they had coached Leo on what to say. She detailed the exchange of the letters at the station and the cash they received, which she claimed they always felt guilty about. She begged for my forgiveness, framing the entire crime as a terrible mistake made out of love for their family, for David. She thought that by baring her soul, she could appeal to the son she had discarded. She didn't realize she wasn't writing an appeal for mercy. She was writing a formal confession. I read the last line, a pathetic, "I'm still your mother," and felt nothing. I placed her letter next to the one Leo had given me all those years ago. They were two halves of the same horrific story. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a private investigator I had kept on retainer. "I have a new job for you," I said. "Find someone for me. His name is Leo." While my parents were dealing with the movers and the humiliation of their eviction, my investigator got to work. It took him less than a month. The information in my mother's confession was a roadmap. He found Leo's mother, Maria, living in a quiet suburb 3 states away. She had remarried years ago and worked as a nurse. Leo, now 28 years old, was a graphic designer living in the same city. The PI's report was thorough, painting a picture of a life rebuilt. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. They had survived. That was more than my parents deserved. For a moment, I considered what to do. Should I just send the confession to the district attorney and remain a ghost? No, that wasn't right. This wasn't just my story. I had been a tool in the crime, but Leo was the victim. Justice, if it was to be real, had to be his. I sent a lawyer first, a quiet, professional man who approached Maria and Leo with the utmost care. He explained that he represented a client who had uncovered evidence of a serious crime committed against them nearly 2 decades ago. He presented them with a choice. They could ignore it and continue with their lives, or they could meet with his client, review the evidence, and be provided with unlimited legal resources to pursue criminal charges. There would be no cost to them ever. They agreed to a meeting. I chose a neutral location, a private conference room in a downtown hotel. When I walked in, my heart hammered in my chest. Leo stood beside his mother. He was taller, of course, with a calm, observant face, but I saw the same sad eyes I remembered from the station. He recognized me instantly. I didn't offer a handshake. I simply gestured to the large file on the table between us. "My name is Alex," I began, my voice steady. 20 years ago, my parents used me to deliver a letter and a little boy to a man at a train station. The boy gave me a letter of his own. I pushed the file forward. Inside, you will find both of those letters. The first is the one you wrote, Leo. The second is a full confession written by my mother a few weeks ago. I looked directly at him. They sold you to pay off their debts. This file contains all the proof needed to convict them of human trafficking and kidnapping. My personal revenge is complete. They have lost everything they value, but legal justice has not yet been served. That right belongs to you. If you choose to press charges, my lawyers and my funds are at your complete disposal. I slid the file across the table. The power was now in his hands.